رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. So last time we were talking about the word Al-Alameen, and we spoke about the word Rabb Al-Alameen, and we put them together. And when we were talking about the word Alameen, we learned that the word Alameen is plural, which means worlds. Its singular, which is the word Alam, is also a plural. So there is no singular to this word. The word Alameen has several different examples, several different meanings. We went over those. The basic point of Al-Alameen is it is by which the Creator is known. Anything other than the Creator Himself comes under the boundaries of Al-Alameen, whatever His ownership lies on. So in that context of Al-Alameen, we were starting to explore some of the more evident creations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. And one of the most evident and fascinating creation, which is not on earth, but is right above earth, is the sky. Or anything right above earth. So we, in that perspective, we're going to be looking at the word As-Samaa or Samawat today. And of course, we're not going to be, despite the fact we're going to be going in details, but still I'm saying we're not going to be going into details because there's a lot more details than I'm going to be presenting today. And on top of that, we're going to be exploring different meanings of this word. The word Samaa actually means anything above you, which could be in any capacity. For example, for this masjid, that ceiling is Samaa because it's right above. It's providing a ceiling. The word Samaa in Arabic language, it can be used for several different purposes. In the Quran, the word has come for 310 times. And in 310 times, it came in different meanings. So today we're going to be looking at those meanings as how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this word Samaa in Quran. So it doesn't always means the sky. Sometimes the word Samaa is also used in place of clouds because clouds are right above us. Sometimes the rain is called Samaa. Sometimes the atmosphere around us is called Samaa. Sometimes this entire universe above us, which is in the meaning of sky, is also called Samaa. So different meanings have been used in the Quran. In Surah Al-Baqarah, if anybody who have memorized that portion, or probably when people recite it, you know, that's from the first two pages. أَوْ كَصَيِّبٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ فِيهِ ظُلُمَاتٌ وَرَعْدٌ وَبَرْقٌ. Okay, now notice the word here. It says أَوْ كَصَيِّبٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ فِيهِ ظُلُمَاتٌ وَرَعْدٌ وَبَرْقٌ. Now here, I'm going to first introduce to you the last three words. Look at the last three words. ظُلُمَات, which means extreme darkness. Okay, Ra'd. Ra'd basically means your thunder. Okay, thunder is Ra'd. And Barq is the lightning. So darkness, thunder, lightning. None of these words fit the definition of sky. Where do they fit? They fit more or less in the definition of cloud. Now go back. أَوْ كَصَيِّبٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ. And the example of this is like of the water that descends from the cloud. Now the word Samaa and the descend together produce the word water from the clouds. Not the water from the sky, but the water from the clouds. Even if somebody says the water from the sky, indirectly it means the water from the clouds. So the water that descends down to you. Now why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not use the word sihab or ghayma, which are the words for clouds in Arabic language? Because notice the next three words Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, darkness. And when you look up in the universe, in the sky, it's all dark. However, in the darkness, there is some light. That's some light. So in the night, which is dark, or in the day, which is dark, the only source of light, because the sun is hidden, is the lightning. And then on top of that, if you go out in the universe, because of its vastness, you get afraid. You get worried because the earth is like the size of a grain, and not even that. And then you on earth is totally indistinguishable. So in that vastness, it gives you the similar fear as if the sudden lightning and the sudden thunder gives. And the person gets all worried, That's basically the kind of state Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word as-Samaa. That it has a similar meaning in that context. So we're going to look at the 6 different meanings that I've found. Number 1 is cloud. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Hijr says, وَأَرْسَلْنَا الرِّيَاحِ I have sent the winds. لَوَاقِحَ فَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً And what do these winds do? They carry over with them the clouds. And these clouds are the ones that possess the water. And we have understood through the process of vaporization how these clouds are found. So in this particular context, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً So in this way, we understand it's a cloud from where the water comes down. In another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً From the sky we send down the water. Okay, now that's one example. The second example is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the atmospheric layers where clouds float. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it in such great details that when you look at this ayah in the current context, you're like, oh my God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about meteorology, the weather. Because back then, people in the Makkah or the Medina, they had never seen mountains of snow. To them it was like, I've never seen it. But here in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about snow-covered mountains. And look at the ayah now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يُزْجِي سَحَابًا So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala slowly moves cloud. ثُمَّ يُؤَلِّفُ بَيْنَهُ And puts pieces of clouds together in layers. Okay? And from where what happens, ثُمَّ يَجْعَلَهُ رُكَامًا فَتَرَى الْوَدْقَ يَخْرُجُ مِنْ خِلَالِهِ Then sets them in layers and then bring forth water in the gaps which is in between them. And then وَيُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مِنْ جِبَالٍ فِيهَا مِنْ بَرَدٍ And from the same atmosphere, He brings what? Hail. Hail. So when the hail comes in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you look at those clouds that produce hails, it may appear to you as if they're snow-covered mountains. They're so dense, they're so huge, they're so big. And the temperature of the atmosphere is to an extent where the water converts to a hail. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word فِيهَا مِن بَرَدٍ يُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مِن جِبَالٍ فِيهَا مِن بَرَدٍ So this is basically how you perceive it. In another example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu alladhi yursilu riyaha Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who sends winds. فَتُثِيرُ سَحَابًا Which brings the clouds. فَتُثِيرُ سَحَابًا فَيَبْسُطُهُ فِي السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the cloud and spreads it however He likes. For example, a lot of the time you're going to notice there's a scattered rain. It only rains in a certain area. Okay? Sometimes dense clouds come in, there's a thunder, there's a lightning, but no rain. Nothing happens. In other times, it's a perfectly beautiful day, but a couple of hours down the road, it's a thunderstorm. It's an awful weather. A few years ago, we noticed that in January, the temperatures went up to 70 degrees in the middle of January. People were so happy, people were out there having fun. It's the best day you can find in January. A few years down the road, there was a tornado warning because this was not norm. This wind system produced a tornado, and it was a very bad tornado that hit down here. It destroyed some of the facilities and some of the rural areas and things like that. So those are all parts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, however we wish, we spread it out. وَأَرْسَلْنَا السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْهِمْ مِدْرَارًا And then there are times when the rain comes continuously. Midrara, it comes continuously. وَجَعَلْنَا الْأَنْهَارَ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهِمْ And when it comes down, it produces streams of water underneath. you're not aware of. So all this water that gets absorbed by the land, where does it go? It goes somewhere. It is absorbed and it travels to someplace. And a lot of the time we find that water, but in an alternate form. Now think about it, if there was no rain, no snow, or less rain, less snow, what happens to our land and what happens to our water reserves? They both get affected. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this way of controlling things. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِدْرَارًا. There are times when we send down continuous rain. It doesn't stop. But what happens as a result of that, in these times, in these modern societies, we have electricity outage. There's no power. Power outage happens. And you will notice that the battery-operated machines can only operate this much. After that, what happens? The water starts creeping into our life, especially in the basements. All these big reservoirs start getting filled up with water. So sometimes it happens that way. So that's another definition. Another definition of the word sama is the atmosphere of the earth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, for example, this whole wind system right above us, which is not necessarily responsible for the rains and the cloud, but is responsible for the rest of the atmosphere. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Nahl, أَلَمْ يَرَوْا إِلَى الطَّيْرِ. Have you not seen the bird? مُسَخَّرَاتٍ فِي جَوِّ السَّمَاءِ. That how it flies in the atmosphere. So here the word atmosphere is being used in the translation, but in Arabic it's the sama, means whatever is above you. Have you not seen how the bird flies and maintains itself? مَا يُمْسِكُهُنْ. Who holds the bird over there? إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Except for Allah. Who holds it? Who taught the bird how to fly? And who taught the bird how to survive in the flight? And who makes sure the bird survives in the flight? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is the word sama there. Now in the fifth meaning of the sama, now this is in Surah Al-Hajj. Now this is an extremely harsh ayah, but it has a lot of messages in it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, anyone who is under the impression that Allah will never help this person in this life or hereafter. Anybody who is in that state of mind, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to help him, is not helpful at all in this life or the hereafter, فَلْيَمْدُدْ بِسَبَبٍ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. Now the word sama is being used over here is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that person then should put a rope on the ceiling and should hang himself, and then should see if that solves the problem. That means the ayah is so dire, saying, you think you can solve the problems? Or do I solve the problem? If you finishing yourself off can solve the problem, then go ahead and do it. You won't be able to do anything. You're only going to be able to destroy yourself, and that's it. So here the word فَلْيَمْدُدْ بِسَبَبٍ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ is being used as the ceiling of the house. And the sixth meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala generally uses the word sky, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Fussilat, ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directed himself where? إِلَى السَّمَاءِ, towards the heavens. وَهِيَ دُخَانٌ, and it was a smoke. Now which time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about? Before anything was created. So He directed himself to some elevation. And that elevation was just smoke. And in the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقَضَاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ. And this is where I created the 7 layers of sky. 7 layers of sky. Out of nothing, there was nothing, it was a smoke, and I created the 7 layers of sky. In another ayah, before I go to the next ayah, I would like to talk about one beautiful distinction Quran makes here. Quran says that there are 7 layers of sky, and a lot of us know that. How many layers of land? Quran says, وَالْأَرْضُ مِثْلَهُنْ, and earth also has the same number of layers as the sky, 7. وَالْأَرْضُ مِثْلَهُنْ, as the sky has 7 layers, the earth has 7 layers. However, when we talk about the word earth or ard, it is singular. It's singular. It's not a plural. It's a singular. But when we talk about the sky, it's plural. So now that comes a question, if this is 7 and that is 7, then why this is singular and why that's plural? And the only explanation to that that's given is because all 7 layers of earth are part of earth. It's the same matter divided into 7 layers. So the core is earth. But when we talk about the skies, the 7 layers, each is distinct in terms of its properties from the layer above. So there's 7 distinct layers. So one layer may be made up of one material, but the layer above is made up of different material. The layer above is made up of different material. So their materials vary, so they're not the same. They're different entities. So we'll probably in some other discussion we'll talk about that one narration that has come about the nature of the layers, that how are they made up and what are they made up of, and the positions of the angels on each layer, and how many angels are as you descend up one layer, and on some of the layers there's a special tasbih of the angels, and some of the angels are used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to command them to leave their position and go to the earth, do the duties and then come back to their position, and how the colors of the angels change because of the tasbih that they do in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what is the tasbih of the angels who are holding the arsh? That's an entirely total different subject matter which we're not going into today. But that is the reason the plural and singular words are being used. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Furqan continues and explores and opens it further and says, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا. He is the one who installed, who produced, ja'ala, created constellations. Now what is a constellation? Constellation is a group of stars forming a recognizable pattern or a cluster. So Buruj, who gave these ideas to the Prophet? There was no advancements made to look up in the skies and talks about constellations or the clusters of the sky. Of course, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to His Prophet that I am the one who created these buruj, these bridges, these constellations. وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا سِرَاجًا وَقَمَرًا مُنِيرًا. And I am the one who have produced 2 kinds of lights. One is as hot as a lamp, and the other one is as cool as a luminous moon. So moon has a totally different kind of a light than sun. It's a borrowed upon light, but there's a light that is cool, but it's a light, and then there's a light which is hot, which is also a light. But the borrowed upon light does not have the same effect as the original source. So who does this? And he says, I did it. Ja'ala, I did it. Fiha. Where fiha? In the skies. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another surah says, ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ وَهِيَ دُخَانٌ. And I put my attention towards the skies when it was what? It was dukhan, smoke. فَقَضَاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ. And I produced the 7 skies. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala further says, فِي يَوْمَيْن. In 2, Yawm in Arabic language is generally used for the word day. However, we are talking about the time when there was no sun, there is no moon. There is no way of saying a day. So a day is not the right translation for the word yawm here. A lot of the time ulama have done the translation of a stage. This was a stage. It was a time frame to which there is no time. We do not know what is that yawm means. That yawm could be a fraction of a second, could be 1 billionth of a second. And I'll share with you probably towards the end that one of the scientific evidences that shows that when the Big Bang happened, how much time was taken for this whole process of formation to take place, and what was and how much was produced in that fraction. So we'll talk about that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I created it in 2 days. وَأَوْحَى فِي كُلِّ سَمَاءٍ. And then I ordered and I gave the revelation to all these skies to do whatever was commanded to them. وَزَيَّنَّا السَّمَاءَ الدُّنْيَا بِمَصَابِيحِ. And the one that is closest to you, O people of the land, the Samaa ad-Dunya, I ornamented it with stars that give you your light at the night time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the cloud of hot gases and all of those different things, that how I created things in layers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses another word here, that kullun in Surah Al-Anbiya, kullun, everything in the universe, fi falakin yasbahun, they're swimming. Uses the word yasbahun, they're swimming in their orbits. So they swim in their orbits, but then there will going to come a time when I'll destroy them. I'll destroy their orbit. But at this time, they are swimming in their orbit. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now talks about another idea. And this idea, I don't know why people did not pay attention to as a result back in 1969 when we first set our foot on moon. There were certain ulama or scholars who gave the fatwa of kufr and so many different things. How could this happen? How could you leave the atmosphere of the world? And how could you go to the moon and stuff like that? Because there were some theories that the people of Rome and the people of Greek had. The earlier scholars who read that work reported that work as a reference point that this is how the earlier civilizations believed. And some of the mid-time period people took it as if it was the research of those earlier people and reported it down. So over the period of time, it became as an accepted fact that maybe it was the research done by the earlier Islamic scholars. Actually, it was just copied over to say, this is what they believe and this is what we believe. So as a result, a lot of these things came about. But look at Surah Al-Rahman when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ma'ashara al-jinni wal-ins. Oh, everybody from the jinn and everybody from the human race. In istata'tum, if you can, an tanfudhu min aqtar as-samawati wal-ard. If you go outside the boundaries of the heavens, if you go outside the boundaries of the earth, if you travel through all the 7 layers of sky, fanfudhu, go ahead and do it. But remember one thing, la tanfudhuna illa bisultan. You cannot do it without me letting you do it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say you cannot do it. Yes, if you travel through, go ahead, make an attempt. But do you think you can make that attempt without my permission? You cannot. So based on these things and the scientific evidences, the modern scholars have come to the point that yes, in the old text, there were evidences that this was not the belief system of the Muslims, that you cannot go outside the atmosphere. If that would have been the case 1,000 years ago or 1,200 years ago, they would not have allowed people to learn about the solar system and the falakiyat and the universe. They would have totally opposed that idea, but they did not. So in some of the books of hadith like Tafseer Durr al-Manthur, written 400-500 years ago, Ibn Abi Hatim and some other people have been documented to said, قال الشمس والقمر والنجوم مسخرة في الفلك بين السماء والأرض. So all these things, the sun, the moon, and all the stars are in rotation in their orbits between the sky and the earth. That was the idea that was presented so many years ago. And then they quoted the ayah right underneath that from Surah Al-Anbiya, وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. They are swimming in their own orbits. Now, the idea of fulk, that was also expressed in some of the tafsir like Tafseer Al-Baghwi and Tafseer Al-Khazin. And these are written in the times prior to we even thinking about going to moon, like hundreds of years ago. It said, Al-Fulku mawjum makfufun duna as-samaa. that this idea of fulk, where these things are moving around and these orbits are being formed, this is an open space. Where is this open space? This is تَجْرِي فِيهِ الشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ وَالنُّجُومُ, where all of these things are going on in the orbit. This is an empty space that you find in the sky. In this empty space is being occupied by these objects, and they're taking and moving this. So why the word fulk has been used over here? And in some of the books it says, وَهُوَ فِي كَلَامِ الْعَرَبِ, in the Arabic language, كُلُّ شَيْءٍ مُسْتَدِيرٌ وَجَمْعُهُ أَفْلَاكٌ. So this word, fulk, is being used because it was believed that everything in the universe is like a ball. It's round in shape. So for the round shape, the word fulk was used, and the plural for that is aflak. So that's why the word was picked to be used for the things around us. So this is basically how they believed. So anyway, the astronomy was there, and there were 7 layers. Now later on, people were influenced by science. And some people made this assumption. Now we are not saying that anything the science has proven is the ultimate truth. Because people in their books of tafsir have gone all these different routes. One book says that the 7 layers talks about the 7 atmospheric layers. Somebody says, no, these are the 7 layers in which the universe is being formed. Somebody says, no, these are the 7 dimensions in which we live in. So people have taken different theories based on their research or their understanding. So none of this is an ultimate truth. However, we have found that the mention of 7 is there in a lot of these theories. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this word in several different places in the Quran. So those 7 layers that are being talked about in terms of atmosphere that is being found in the modern science, one is called the troposphere, the one closest to us. The one above that is the tropopause. The one above that is the stratosphere. The one above that is the ozone layer. So when you talk about the ozone layer is the 4th layer from us. So there are 3 layers below it, and there are 3 layers above it. And it's right in the middle. And the idea of these layering system is that there are different kind of rays that are emitted from the sun. Some are filtered by the layers above the ozone layer. For example, the mesosphere, the thermosphere, the exosphere. These layers which are above the ozone, they're responsible for filtering some of the rays. Then they get to the ozone layer, which does some filtering, and then the rest of the filtering is being done by the layers below. So that is why the high energy radiations and low energy radiations, those are the 2 terminologies that we generally use for the sun rays, and they're being filtered at different layers. So that's one understanding of this subject matter, but not the only understanding of this subject matter. Now with this, we're going to move on to the creation of the universe, and we're going to continue with this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Anbiya, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, those people who have disbelieved, have they not seen أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا, this entire universe that you see around you was a singularity, was one. So, كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا, and we have spread it. We spread it. We asked the singularity to break into pieces, and perfectly we placed it, and we are continuously increasing the size of this universe. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said this in the ayah of the Quran, that this is how we approach this. Okay, now before I go to the numbers, which I told you earlier on, this is the number, let me introduce the number to you now, in fact. The science says, in 1 billionth of a second. How much? 1 billionth of a second. Okay? This, so much? Yes, this Big Bang happened. As a result of his 1 quintillion. How many? 1 quintillion stars came into existence. And quintillion is a number in front of which there are 18 zeros. Okay? 1 billionth of a second, something happens, As a result, 1/quintillionth stars come into existence. And then things are still expanding. Subhanallah. So this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kun fayakun. Happens. When I say it should happen, it happens. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I told you, created things in stages. And there's a hadith that I introduced to you several months ago. I would like to bring back that attention to that hadith, where it is reported by Musannaf Abdul Razzaq. This is the teacher of Imam Muslim in hadith, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked that what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created first? And this was asked by Jabir bin Abdullah, one of the companions. So Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Anna Allah Ta'ala khalaqa qabla al-ashya'i nura nabiyyik," that your Prophet's light was created before anything existed in the universe. And then what happens? Min nurihi faja'ala dhalika nur. And then from that nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything, but that nur was in the state yudawwiru bil qudrati haythu sha'a Allah ta'ala. That nur would travel in the universe, whatever existed, because nothing existed. Wherever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pleased, it would go. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ ذَلِكَ الْوَقْتِ. And at that time, there was nothing, لوح ولا قلم ولا جنة ولا نار ولا ملك ولا سماء ولا أرض ولا شمس ولا قمر ولا جن ولا إنس. At this time, there was no pen, there was no book, there was no heaven, there was no hell, there was no angels, there was no sky, there was no earth, no sun, no moon, no jinn, no humans. Nothing existed at that time. فَلَمَّا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ أَن يَخْلُقَ الْخَلْقِ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to create the creations. So قَسَمَ ذَلِكَ النُّورِ. The nur that was my nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divided that nur أَرْبَعَةِ أَجْزَاء, into 4 parts. فَخَلَقَ مِنْ جُزْءِ الْأَوَّلِ الْقَلَمِ. And from the first part created the pen. مِنَ الثَّانِ. From the second part created the lawh, on the book on which the pen will write. وَمِنَ الثَّالِثِ الْعَرْشِ. And from the third part created the arsh. And from the fourth part, it took and created 4 more parts. فَخَلَقَ مِنَ الْجُزْءِ الْأَوَّلُ حَمَلَةِ الْعَرْشِ. From the first part created the angels that will hold the arsh. وَمِنَ الثَّانِيَ الْكُرْسِي. From the second part created the kursi, that you'd read in Ayat al-Kursi, وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. وَمِنَ الثَّالِثِ. And from the third part, بَقِيَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ. All the angels were created. And then ثُمَّ قَسَمَ الْجُزْءُ الرَّابِعِ. And then took the fourth part and further divided into 4 parts. فَخَلَقَ مِنَ الْأَوَّلِ السَّمَاوَاتِ. And from that, took the first part and created the skies. وَمِنَ الثَّانِيَ الْأَرْضَيْنِ. From the second part created the earth. وَمِنَ الثَّالِثِ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ. From the third part created the heavens, the Jannah and the hell. And then from the fourth part created and further divided into 4 parts. And the hadith is a very long hadith, keeps going on. But this is where I want to stop because of the sky. So this is basically how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started creating things. So Islam, in Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does talks about the Big Bang Theory to some extent. Now, there's an ayah that you and I commonly read. While doing research on the subject matter, I read into a totally different translation of this ayah. Probably was done in these modern times. Then I went to the books of linguistics, and I found that this one word has so many meanings that it could actually be translated this way. So the ayah that you and I know is قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ. I seek refuge from the Lord of, usually we hear the meaning, dawn, or the daybreak. Correct? But when I went into the books of Arabic and I started looking at the word falaq, it means split. Something to be splitted. It means whole creation. It also means all things that are created. It also means a piece broken off. It means all of these things. So some people have actually used this word falaq in the creation of the universe, and they have done translation like this, that, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, qul, tell these people that I seek refuge from the Rabb who did what? In a very quick time, He brought into creation all the beings. So it was one, and He split it. It was singularity, and He's the one who quickly split it. So from the meaning of split, from the meaning of the whole creation, from the meaning of all things that are created, from the meaning a piece broken off, they have given this translation that the Lord who created everything in a split of a second, or who split things and from the singularity. So this meaning was actually extracted from another ayah from the Holy Quran, from Surah Al-An'am. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word faliq. The faliq actually can be used for the word cleaver that you usually use in your meat shop. It's a very big piece, yeah, right? A very hefty piece. It's a broad blade the butchers use. So, faliqul habbi wan nawa. The one who actually makes from the seed, the sprout comes out. So faliq, He's the one who makes this thing, comes out from the seed. So that's another meaning from where the falaq has been taken, that the one who breaks things and brings forth new things. So this was another meaning that I ran into. Of course, around that, people have done a lot of research in the theory of relativity and some of the other things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Zariyat, وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ, and heavens we constructed with strength. وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ, and we are continuously expanding it. And indeed we are its expander. So we created it and we're expanding it. وَخَلَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, and we created each and everything. فَقَدَّرَهُ تَقْدِيرًا, and we determined it with determination. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another ayah in Surah Al-Qamar says, إِنَّ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ. Everything that we have created has a predestination. It is supposed to go and reach a certain destination. وَمَا أَمْرُنَا إِلَّا وَاحِدَةٌ كَلَمْحٍ بِالْبَصَرِ, and our command is but one, like a glance of the eye. So you probably, may do this, and even in less than that time frame, our things will happen, whatever we want things to happen. So this entire universe, it has so many things that it holds. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the stars, as I already told you, وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ وَالنُّجُومَ مُسَخَّرَاتٍ بِأَمْرِهِ. By His will, all of this entire universe is moving on. And for those of you who have done some research in cosmology, know that these stars are made up of hydrogen and helium. Hydrogen and helium. And when this reaction happens, it's a very, very atomic reaction that takes place in the submersion of these two gases. As a result, these lights are emitted that reach us in 1,000,000 light years. That you see this glowing star up there. Now think about it, if all these glowing stars would leave their orbits, what will happen? Everything back to singularity. So that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مُسَخَّرَاتٌ بِأَمْرِهِ. By His will, they're going on in the orbits. But if He doesn't will, nothing will going to happen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in Surah Al-Takwir, فَإِذَا النُّجُومُ كَدَرَتْ. What if these stars fall down? And when they will fall down? In Surah Al-Mursalat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ طُمِسَتْ. And when these stars will be without light. So when they will be without light, and when they will going to fall down, what shall happen? The day of judgment shall happen. The end of the times shall come. But as long as I wish, they shall keep going in their clusters. So in Surah Ali Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, in the creation of the day and the night, لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, those people who think, it is for them, there is a sign. الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, and those people who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all states, standing, sitting down, lying down. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, and they're constantly thinking, pondering, researching, innovating whatever they see in the heavens and the earth. And to them, they're so thankful, nothing comes out of their mouth except for رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have not created none of these things without a purpose. سُبْحَانَكَ فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. All we ask from you is, please save us from the hellfire. Yet the idea, as I told you earlier on, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when these guys look at the entire universe, يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, it's not like they just think about it and forget about it. It's like they think about it, they ponder, they do research, and they try to utilize it. They try to utilize it to the best of their abilities. Now, in the last 100 years, we have seen certain nations which were destroyed, and then they brought themselves back and became one of the leading nations in this world. And at the same time, we have seen nations that were the leading nations of the world, and now they're not the leading nations in this world anymore. So something happened. Somebody did a mistake somewhere to lose that spot. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَيْسَ الْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. If you work hard, there is something for you. And if we as individuals or as collective people stop working, by working we don't mean 9-to-5 jobs, by working we mean what have we done which is different. Now Gandhi said something very, very beautiful which I love. He said that be that difference. Be that difference that you want to see in the world. Be that difference. It is, and somebody else said, it's easy to curse the darkness. However, it is difficult to light a candle. So we got to be among those people who are lighting the candle, but the truth is, we are unfortunately among those people, majority of us, who are cursing the darkness. So that's where we have to make a distinction that if we represent 10% of the U.S. medical doctor force as a small minority, out of the 10% of the doctor force, what research has come forth? Or are we just doing the 9-to-5 job and doing the research? If we are the teachers, what have we done different? Have we brought any new idea on the table? A new innovation, a new way of teaching, delivering, any new methodology? If we are a physicist or a chemist or a biologist or a plumber or a technician, what have we done different? That would be a breakthrough. It will be a way for people to look at and say, okay, man, this guy is a business owner of a small business, but he came up with this great idea of running a small business. He streamlined the process. He came up with this inventory system that we never thought about. He came up with the storage system that we never thought about. However, what we are doing, we are on the receiving end. We're trying to see how storage and inventory system works. How about coming up with our own system of check and balance and fascinating the world and giving it back to the world, saying, this is how you can improve the process. This is how things can be done better. And people are doing it. The Japanese who came up with this idea of a fishbone process, this was a big breakthrough in how you do problem solving. Then the Six Sigma training that is extremely useful in the manufacturing industry, where they go through the white belt and all the way through the black belt, that how manufacturing can be done better, how processes can be improved. How can I reduce the time frame in communication between one to the other model? How can I reduce the size of my inventory to maybe daily basis, yet not affect my sales? How is Benz and BMW able to do that? But why as a Ford engineer I'm not able to do that? Why as a Honda engineer I'm not able to do what Benz is able to do? If they can do it, I should also be able to do it. How about, can I not produce a car with 57 nations in the world? Cannot produce a car where people who were devastated in the World War II, Germany and Japan, are the leading car producers in the world. Why? Or am I just busy building palaces and getting married and having more wives? Is that what my priority? And having lots and lots of kids who are fighting over who's going to be the next king? What is the priority? That's basically needs to be defined. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the pious among you are those يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. They are constantly thinking, how can I benefit from this universe and benefit the humanity. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم يا غفار. ربنا زدنا علما ربنا زدنا علما ربنا زدنا علما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد.